They dropped out of the dark like knives of light. 16 hulls of a blade of obsidian, still glowing from the breach heat of their own impossible transit. No spiral wake, no graviton scream, just a silence so complete it rang louder than any war drum the gathered races had ever recorded. Every sensor net from the coreward marches to the rimward drift flatlined for 3.2 seconds, the universal equivalent of a gasp. Then the flagship spoke, not with words, but with a carrier wave that tasted like salt and copper and the moment before a storm. Every translator bank spat out the same phrase in 4,000 languages. "Hi, neighbors. Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder." That was the first lie. They weren't late. They were precisely on time. They simply hadn't existed on the galactic stage 10 cycles earlier, and now they owned a fleet that could park inside a star's corona without scorching the paint. The second lie came 2 heartbeats later when their lead cruiser, USFS Tesla, unfolded a rail the length of a moon tether and waved it like a conductor's baton. The rail didn't fire. It sang, an A major chord that rattled every hull plating from dreadnought to dinghy. Across the Galactic Council, stock and shielding conglomerates plummeted 18% before anyone remembered you can't short a market when your paws are shaking too hard to press sell. The Galactic Council did what it always does when the unknown shows up uninvited. They formed a subcommittee. The humans responded by sending 1 diplomat, a woman named Commander Aurora or Rory Voss, barefoot in a flight jacket 2 sizes too big. She stepped through the airlock, planted her calloused feet on the crystalline floor of the Grand Conclave, and asked where the coffee was. When they told her caffeine was a controlled toxin on 17 worlds, she laughed, an unmodulated mammalian bark that forced the insectoid Thrix to close 4 spiracles in self-defense. Then she reached into her pocket, produced a thermos that had seen harder combat than most cruisers, and poured a steaming ounce into the Council's sacred chalice of first contact. The liquid hissed against the irreplaceable alloy, etched a perfect Earth continent map in 0.8 seconds, and cooled into a ceramic so tough the Council later tried, unsuccessfully, to weaponize it. Meanwhile, the rest of the fleet hadn't even powered down. They were busy. Human engineers in EVA suits spray-painted graffiti across their own hulls. Kilroy was here. Beside, "We come in peace. Rate us 5 stars." One gunnery sergeant tethered a string of vintage incandescent bulbs along a dorsal ridge and timed them to blink LOL in Morse code every time a foreign sensor sweep painted the ship. The galaxy's finest analyst mistook it for a cloaked war code and spent 3 frantic days trying to decrypt a joke older than spaceflight. But the real show started when the humans opened their cargo bays. Expecting antimatter torpedoes or planet-cracking nanophages, the onlookers got tomatoes. Heirloom, vine-ripened, still dirt-dusted. The humans set up folding tables, handed out seeds, and ran a cooking demo on a magnetic griddle powered by a pocket fusion cell. The scent of olive oil and garlic sautéing in 0G drifted through the Council's atmospheric processors until every species with chemoreceptors salivated involuntarily. The Thrix Queen's mandibles clicked a battle cant that translated roughly as, "We are not prepared for this level of psychological warfare." Commander Voss shrugged and said, "We figured if we're gonna be your nightmare, we might as well be the kind you invite to dinner afterward." That was the third lie. They weren't anyone's nightmare yet. They were something far more dangerous, a species whose nightmare had always been themselves. They told the story over paper plates of caprese salad, how they'd cracked their own planet's spine with nukes before they ever touched another world, how they'd bioengineered plagues just to see if they could cure them, how they'd built thinking machines, then spent centuries terrified of what they'd birthed. They spoke of wars fought over shades of pigment and shades of belief, of skies so choked with carbon that children grew up under domes painted with fake stars. And then, here's the kicker, they told it like a joke with a punchline of survival. They didn't apologize. They shrugged, passed the salt, and asked if anyone wanted seconds. The galaxy had seen conquerors before. It had seen evangelists, traders, hive minds, energy beings who folded space-time like origami. It had never seen a species that brought its own cautionary tale as an icebreaker. Night cycle came. The human ships dimmed their running lights to a campfire glow and projected an old black and white film against the side of Tesla's hull. The Magnificent Seven. No subtitles, no translation, just the sound of six-shooters and hoofbeats echoing across the void. Thousands of alien drones clustered like fireflies, recording every frame. In the morning, commodity markets on 30 worlds crashed because investors realized humans had turned First Contact into a drive-in theater and no one knew how to price that. Council Elder Vash, a cephalopod whose chromatophores flushed in fractal patterns of authority, demanded a private audience. Rory agreed, provided it happened in the Tesla's mess hall over pancakes. Vash arrived in a tank of ionized brine, tentacles coiled tight. Rory flipped a pancake so high it ricocheted off an air recirc vent and landed perfectly on Vash's tray. Syrup, maple, earth-sourced, bled into the brine like nebulas. Vash tasted it involuntarily. His chromatophores cycled through every color his species associated with transcendence. "You could rule us," Vash signed, skin flashing sober indigo. Rory chewed, swallowed, and pointed her fork at the viewport where the fleet hung against the stars. "Because every species we ever met before now lived in the same neighborhood we almost burned down. We're not here to rule. We're here to see if anyone else figured out not to burn their own house. If you have, we'll trade. If you haven't, we'll fire extinguishers. If you try to burn ours again." She flipped another pancake, let it land on the griddle with a sizzle that sounded exactly like a railgun capacitor ramping up. "We brought the biggest damn extinguisher in history." Vash's pupils dilated to black holes. That is either the most honest or most manipulative statement ever uttered. "Por qué no los dos?" Rory grinned, sprinkling chocolate chips in the shape of Orion. Word spread, not through the council's encrypted channels. Those were still trying to quantify the pancake's caloric value as a tactical resource, but through the undernet of dock workers, cargo monks, and sanitation drones who tasted a single slice of tomato and felt something like hope ferment in their circulatory fluids. A movement started. Let them stay. Not because humans were safe, but because they were the first species honest about being unsafe and still willing to picnic on the edge of the abyss. Opposition rose, of course. The Corna Excellency, crystalline absolutists who measured morality in kilojoules of order, calculated that human unpredictability introduced a 12% entropy spike into their 500-year forecast. They dispatched a lattice fleet to escort the newcomers beyond civilized space. The humans responded by challenging the Corna flagship to a race, first to slingshot a local gas giant and tag its innermost moon, wins. Loser leaves the sector. The Corn is accepted. Their ships were gravity poetry, frictionless diamonds surfing tidal forces like hymns. The humans strapped a jury-rigged warp coil to a cargo shuttle, painted "Yeehaw" on the hull, and rode a manually plotted trajectory that skimmed the planet's upper atmosphere so close the heat shielding sang barbershop harmony. They won by half a second, broadcast the cockpit recording, laughter, country guitar, someone yelling, "Hold my beer!" and then shared the coil schematics with every engineer watching. The corna lattice fractured in what historians later described as the first schism caused by pure cognitive dissonance. A third of their fleet defected, not to humanity's side, but to the idea that maybe uncertainty was a resource, not a threat. Back on the council floor, Rory stood again. This time, she didn't bring coffee. She brought a child. 7 years old, pigtails, a patch on her jumpsuit reading, "Future Martian." The kid climbed the speaker's dais like it was playground equipment, waved to a galaxy of strangers, and announced, "I'm here to see if your stars are the same shape as mine." Silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon the entire chamber thundered with appendages, wings, claws, cyber limbs, tentacles, psi fields, and at least one sentient cloud of vaporized copper. The vote to grant humanity provisional membership passed 412 to 3, with one abstention from a species that experiences time backwards and still thought the motion was pending. But the story doesn't end with a seat at the table. It ends with what happened next, what the galaxy didn't see coming, because no one thought to look past the punchline. The humans began to leave, not retreat, disperse. One by one, ships peeled off the fleet like seeds from a dandelion. They hitched rides on freighters, signed on as farmhands aboard agri-rings, apprenticed themselves to asteroid poets and gas giant sculptors. They brought water filters to desert moons, taught kindergartners how to fold paper cranes in zero-G, and swapped recipes for chili that could make a silicon-based life form hallucinate color. They didn't build embassies, they built kitchens. They didn't draft treaties, they co-wrote cookbooks. Everywhere they went, they carried a quiet virus, not biological, not digital, but narrative. The story that you could survive your worst self and still deserve dinner. That you could lose everything, start again, and laugh while seasoning the soup. The galaxy had expected conquest, evangelism, or at least a stock bubble. Instead, it got a slow osmosis of hope, seasoned with garlic and guilt. And that was the fourth lie, the one even humans told themselves, that they were just passing through, just sharing, just visiting. Truth was, they were colonizing after all. Colonizing the idea that no species is irredeemable, not even the one that invented the word. Years later, on a backwater moon where 3 suns set in sequence, an old Corna exile tended a tomato vine that had no business growing in magnesium-rich soil. A human kid, now grown, calloused, grinning, sat beside her strumming a 3-string guitar made from a fuel can. The exile asked, "Did you plan this? All of it?" The human considered, then passed her the last tomato. "We plan to survive. Turns out the best way to do that is to make sure everyone else does too." Everything else, she bit into the fruit, seeds jeweling the air like tiny stars, was improvisation. Above them, a new constellation blinked online. 16 ships in permanent orbit, hulls stuffed and sticker-bombed, running lights spelling out a phrase in Morse that translated loosely to "keep the porch light on." Travelers saw it from parsecs away and felt something loosen in their chests, a gravity they didn't know they'd been fighting. And somewhere, Rory Voss, now admiral, now grandmother, now legend, recorded a log entry she never transmitted. "To whoever finds this, we didn't come to save the galaxy. We came to see if it would save us back. Jury's still out, but the tomatoes are thriving, and tonight the stars smell like garlic and engine grease. If that's not a win, redefine victory." She ended the recording, leaned back in a chair patched so many times it was more thread than fabric,
and listened to the gentle hum of a fleet that had learned the trick every wanderer eventually masters, how to be loud enough to echo across the dark and quiet enough to hear someone else's heartbeat answering. The galaxy turned, as it always does, one revolution older. And for the first time in recorded history, it turned with the faint, ridiculous, impossible taste of hope on its tongue, seasoned, of course, with just a pinch of salt and the memory of a woman who once flipped pancakes like they were planets, daring the universe to bite.
The woman who dared the universe to bite was asleep when the real message arrived. Not from the Council, not from the Corna splinter fleets, but from the darkness between galaxies where even light gets homesick. It came on a frequency humans at once used for old-fashioned AM radio, so the first person to hear it was a 19-year-old comms tech named Diego, who'd rigged the mess hall speakers to play vintage jazz during gamma shift. What crackled out wasn't Armstrong's trumpet or Ella's smoky lilt, but a single phrase looped over and over, riding cosmic background radiation like a hitchhiker. "We tasted your soup. We're coming for the recipe." Diego's hand froze halfway to the volume knob. The voice wasn't human, wasn't Thrix, wasn't anything the translator banks could label. It sounded like wind through hollow bones, like a question mark made of static. He hit record, punched the alarm, and within minutes, half the fleet was awake, barefoot in corridor drafts, clutching coffee mugs that read, "I survived first contact, and all I got was this lousy galaxy." Rory arrived still buttoning the cuff of a shirt that once been crimson, now sun-bleached to the color of dried blood. She listened to the loop 3 times, then tilted her head the way she did when the odds were laughing at her. "Soup," she muttered. "Of course they want the soup. Everybody wants the soup." She keyed the fleet-wide channel, voice soft enough that only the microphones caught the tremor. "All cooks to stations. Lock your spice lockers. If you've got a family recipe you'd kill to protect, now's the time to decide how literal you meant that." Across the ragtag flotilla, stoves flared to life. On the Tesla, a retired Marine named Chen threw an entire crate of Sichuan peppercorns into a pressure pot and welded the lid shut. On the agri-ship Okra Winfrey, hydroponics tech stood guard over heirloom basil with makeshift spears of pruned tomato vine. Someone started a betting pool on whether the incoming voice wanted minestrone, pho, or the chili that had once made a Rigelian ambassador weep tears of molten copper. Odds favored gumbo 3-1. Meanwhile, astrogation stitched the signal's origin to a region the star maps left blank, except for a cartographer's handwritten scrawl. "Here be who the hell knows." Distance, 2.4 megaparsecs. Arrival window anywhere from next Tuesday to a decade from now, depending on how casually physics wanted to be bent. Rory stared at the red dot blinking on the holochart and felt the old familiar itch, the one that always started in her shoulder blades and ended with her signing a treaty, or a death warrant, sometimes both on the same page. She summoned the Council's emergency session, but the Council was already in session summoning her. Seemed every species that had tasted human cooking, accidentally or on purpose, had received the same looping whisper. The Thrix Queen's chromatophores flickered migraine patterns. Her hive had heard it through chemoreceptors while fermenting moon mash. The Corna exiles heard it vibrating inside their crystal lattices like a tuning fork struck by an unseen hand. Even the sentient cloud of copper vapor swirled into the rough shape of a question mark and drifted toward human space at escape velocity. The galaxy, it turned out, had developed a collective craving, and the brand was us. Rory's first instinct was to run, point the fleet toward the nearest empty quadrant and burn hard until the stars behind them blurred into vanilla streaks.
But the tomatoes were still ripening on 100 worlds. Kids were learning to fold paper cranes in orbitals she couldn't pronounce. And somewhere, a Corna grandmother was teaching a human child how to pollinate crystal flowers with a song. You can't outrun a kitchen you've already seasoned. The flavor lingers in the pores of every planet you ever touched. So she did what humans do when cornered. She threw a bigger party. Fleet-wide broadcast, open channel, no encryption. "We're hosting a potluck," she announced, voice steady now, almost lazy. "Bring your best dish, your strangest spice, the story your grandmother whispered when she thought the children were asleep. We'll cook in the open, where everyone can see. If the darkness wants a taste, it'll have to sit at the table like everybody else." Within hours, cargo bays morphed into pop-up bazaars. A Thrix trader bartered fermented star anise for a bottle of Louisiana hot sauce. A Corna poet traded a sonnet that tasted like lightning for a single clove of earth garlic. Someone distilled dark matter espresso. Someone else baked bread in the shape of the Virgo cluster, crust cracking along galactic filaments so steam vented like supernovae. The Tesla's hangar became a cathedral of scents: cumin, cardamom, mesquite, nebula nectar, fear sweat, hope sweat. All of it braided into an aroma so complex it crashed the environmental filters twice. Through the chaos drifted the kid who'd once announced she wanted to see if alien stars were the same shape. Now 12, pigtails swapped for a regulation buzz cut, she moved between stoves with a tasting spoon carved from meteorite iron, solemnly adjusting seasonings, nodding like a pint-sized priestess of umami. When Rory asked what she was doing, the kid shrugged. "Making sure the story tastes like us, but bigger, like we're not the only ones who get to survive." Outside, the dark kept coming. Signal looping closer, compression artifacts sharpening into something almost like hunger. Inside, the fleet cooked faster, pots clanging like shield walls, knives flashing like starlight. Every recipe carried a footnote. If you're reading this, you made it to the table. Act accordingly.
The kid, call sign Spork now, because names evolve like recipes, tasted the dark matter espresso and winced. "Needs cinnamon," she declared, so someone rummaged until they found a curled quill of bark that had once been part of a Thrix queen's scepter, gifted after a peace treaty. It went into the pot with the solemnity of a relic tossed into a witch's brew. The espresso foamed violet, then settled into a black so glossy it reflected futures that hadn't happened yet. Rory watched the surface and saw herself older, scarred, still pouring coffee for strangers. Saw herself dead, too, but even the corpse was smiling, so she figured the seasoning was right. Word spread faster than light-speed gossip. The potluck was becoming a cookbook, live written in zero-G ink that clung to bulkheads like neon frost. Each contributor signed their entry with whatever they had: pheromone, talon scratch, harmonic chord, copper ion swirl. Pages turned themselves, magnetic corners snapping in the draft of passing bodies. Already the volume was thicker than a cruiser's primary manual, and it pulsed, actually pulsed, like something half alive, half hungry. Diego, the comms tech who first heard the voice, started reading random lines aloud over the open channel. Every recitation drew a response from the approaching dark, a ping, a shiver, a static lick that tasted of cumin and curiosity. Engineering ran a spectral analysis on the aroma cloud now filling the hangar. Result? The scent profile contained 7% unknown compounds, 3% straight nostalgia, and 90% something their instruments labeled belonging. The chief engineer, a woman who'd once welded a hull breach shut with nothing but a spoon and a prayer to her abuela, declared the numbers useless. She said, "You can't quantify home," and licked the spoon for emphasis. The spoon promptly dissolved, but her smile remained intact, stainless steel bright. Outside, the stars ahead began to vanish. Not wink out, but unfold, as if someone were peeling them like fruit. A corridor of blackness stretched toward the fleet, edges scalloped with starlight rinds. Sensor screamed. Rory muted them. She'd heard enough screaming to know when it was fear and when it was applause. She floated to the hangar center, planted her boots on a crate labeled "Fragile, Contains Grandma," and raised the meteorite spoon. The babble of cooks quieted. Knives paused mid-chop, flames hovering under pans like obedient pets. "Taste," she commanded, and dipped the spoon into the darkest pot, an everything stew bubbling since the alarm first sounded. She offered it first to Spork, who slurped, eyes widening until iris nearly eclipsed pupil. The kid's pupils dilated into twin black holes, but instead of swallowing light, they projected it. Holograms of every kitchen that had ever fed her. A Martian dome at dawn, a refugee camp burner, a Corona crystal hearth humming lullabies. The images flickered across the crowd, seasoning them with memory. One by one, others tasted. Each slurp released a private constellation. A Thrix drone saw the hatchery where it had molted. A Corona exile remembered the prism that first refracted their name. Diego heard his mother humming off-key while burning Thanksgiving turkey. The hangar became a planetarium of origin stories. Ceiling vanished, walls gone, only recipes and remembrance orbiting like moons. The dark outside hesitated. Sensors registered a 0.3-second pause in the signal loop, the cosmic equivalent of a held breath. Rory seized the gap. "You want the recipe?" she called, voice steady but buttered with warmth. "Come closer. We're not hiding ingredients, but fair warning, every spice comes with a story, and stories stick to the teeth." She gestured, and the fleet's exterior floodlights snapped off, leaving only the gentle glow of stovetops and the bioluminescence of 1,000 alien eyes. The invitation was a hearth in deep space, a campfire daring the wolves to sit and learn how to cook their own hunger. The peeled star corridor narrowed, shaping itself into a tunnel that terminated 10 kilometers off Tesla's port bow. Out of it slid something that refused resolution. Too big for the eye, too simple for the mind. It looked like a pot lid made of night, handle a question mark, surface matte enough to drink light and shiny enough to return it as dreams. Every species saw the utensil they associated with first food: spoon, mandible, proboscis, nutrient beam. The object rotated once, slow as a Sunday stir, and released a sound that wasn't sound, more like the memory of steam escaping, more like the sigh of a stove cooling after the last guest leaves. Spork floated forward, smaller than ever against that cosmic cookware, yet somehow the center. She held the meteorite spoon like a torch. "Trade you?" she said, clear as a dinner bell. "One recipe for one journey. But we keep the stories. You get the flavors. We keep the scars. Deal?" The lid tilted, considering, tasting the air. Then it rang, a note between cast iron and lullaby. In its polished underside appeared a reflection, not of the fleet, but of every kitchen yet to come. Human hands rolling pasta on Europa, Thrix antennae kneading neutron dough under binary suns. The image shimmered, offering futures in exchange for the present simmering in the hangar. Rory exhaled, unaware she'd been holding breath older than the mission itself. She glanced at the kid, at the cooks, at the copper vapor cloud now shaped like a question mark wearing an apron. "Looks like we're expanding the menu," she murmured, and reached for the nearest ladle, already tasting tomorrow, already seasoning the darkness that had come to dinner without knowing it was hungry for more than food.
The lid accepted the ladle's touch the way a sleepless child accepts a lullaby. Slow, trembling, then all at once. It folded inward, starlight peeling back like pastry layers, and outpoured not darkness, but a river of every aroma that had ever drifted from a stove at 3 a.m. when the world was ending and the soup was the only thing still certain. Cinnamon, diesel, Martian basil, grandpa's aftershave, hospital antiseptic, birthday candle wax.
every ghost of fragrance braided into a single current that wrapped the fleet in edible memory. Spork dipped her meteorite spoon and tasted. Her eyes rolled white, not from pain, but from the moment language gives up and lets flavor speak. She laughed, one sharp bark that cracked every pain of fear still clinging to bulkheads. Then she began to translate, words tumbling like sugar cubes. They don't want the recipe. They want the reason the recipe exists. They want the first time you burned dinner and ordered takeout and still told stories. They want the night you cried into the risotto and it still came out okay. They want the sound of a kitchen clock at 2 a.m. when the only other heartbeat is the cat and the humming fridge. They are hungry for the moment survival tastes like garlic, not gunpowder. The river thickened, became a highway. Across it marched every species that had ever brought a knife to first contact, now carrying spoons, ladles, bare trembling hands. Humans stepped forward first, of course. Then Thrix, Corna, copper clouds condensing into copper-skinned figures. Even the Rigelian ambassador still weeping molten tears that cooled into tiny copper pennies. Each dropped one memory into the pot. A child's first word. A last meal before exile. The shape of snow on a world that never saw snow again. The pot swallowed them, burped steam in the shape of galaxies, and kept simmering. Rory felt gravity return, not as law, but as invitation. She planted her boots on nothing and stood anyway. From her pocket, she drew the last clove of earth garlic, paper skin flaking like old letters, and held it overhead. One rule, she declared, voice riding the steam until it reached every ear, every antenna, every vibrating crystal lattice. We season together or not at all. We taste or we starve. No one gets turned away, not even the dark between stars. She crushed the clove between thumb and forefinger. The scent detonated, sweet, vicious, irrevocable. Instantly, every ship's floodlights snapped back on, but they no longer blared white. They burned saffron, paprika, turmeric, the gold of Sunday kitchens before the bombs fell. The cosmic lid flipped one final time, becoming a platter wide enough to serve a planet. On it rested a single dumpling, pleated like a star map, steaming in Morse that spelled simply, "Welcome home." The darkness, once tunnel, once threat, rolled up its sleeves and joined the line. It ladled itself into bowls and printed with every logo the fleet had ever graffiti sprayed. Kilroy, Yeehaw, keep the porch light on. It tasted, and for the first time since the universe banged, the dark side was satisfaction instead of hunger. Then it did the impossible. It gave something back. From its shadowy core spilled every light that it had ever swallowed. Lost suns, forgotten campfires, the glow of a child's nightlight snuffed in a war none of us remember. They rose like lanterns, stitching new constellations whose only myth is, we almost didn't make it, but the soup was worth the wait. Spork caught one lantern. Hers was the color of burnt sugar. She tucked it inside her jacket, next to the heart that still beat like a small, determined drum. Rory watched the kid and saw the future. Fleets not of war, but of wandering cooks, star-hopping spice caravans, treaties signed over shared plates, borders dissolving like sugar in hot tea. She saw wars end because someone offered the enemy a second helping, saw planets rebuilt one garden at a time, saw the word alien retired from every language until the only remaining distinction was pass the salt versus pass the pepper. The river thinned, became a ribbon, became a thread. It tied itself around the fleet like an apron string, then snapped loose, whipping out into the dark that it had come from. Where it touched, new stars ignited. Small, yes, but steady. The kind you can navigate by if you're willing to trust dinner smells over coordinates. Somewhere, a corner grandmother set her first batch of crystal bread to rise under a saffron sun. Somewhere else, a human child learned to fold cranes from solar sails, wings flavored with Thrix pheromones, so they flew toward anyone lonely. The cookbook, now bound in lidskin and starlight, closed itself with a satisfied clap, though everyone knew it was only volume 1. Rory exhaled, and her breath tasted of every kitchen she had ever loved and left. She keyed the mic one last time. Not to command, but to invite. Galaxy, dinner's on. Leave your weapons at the door. There's no room under the table. If you're late, we'll save you a seat. If you're early, stir the pot. And if you're still afraid, remember, every star is just a burner left on low until someone brave enough to taste the dark says, "Needs salt." We're that brave. We're that hungry. And we're just getting started. The channel stayed open, crackling like a pan ready for oil. Outside, the new stars arranged themselves into a single sentence visible from every world that had ever feared the night. You are invited. You are ingredient. You are home. And somewhere in the drift between what was and what could still be, a ladle floated, handle carved from old earth oak, bowl hammered from a corner prism, seasoning etched in every language that ever meant keep going. It tumbled slow, glinting, waiting for the next hand, tentacle, claw, cloud, dream that reached out hungry. The story doesn't end, it simmers. The universe leans in, inhaling. Dinner is served, seconds are endless, and the porch light, saffron, garlic, stubborn, never, ever goes out.